Hello, everyone. On behalf of Dr. Bill Kelly, I would like to thank you for watching our workshop here on using large language models to summarize descriptive evaluations for the medical student progress evaluation. This is our disclaimer that what we're going to discuss today are our opinions alone and do not represent the position of the Uniformed Services University or the Department of Defense. We don't have any conflicts of interest. We will be mentioning some specific products, but that is in no way an endorsement of those products. As I mentioned, I'm Paul Hemmer. I'm the professor and vice chair for educational programs in the Department of Medicine. And Bill Kelly, who will be joining us in a bit, is our clerkship director and professor of medicine. We would like to acknowledge the help of a couple of other faculty members at the Uniformed Services University. Dr. Harry Burke has helped us with developing the prompt for AI. And Dr. Joshua Duncan was kind enough to allow us to use a few of his slides from presentations that he's done about artificial intelligence. So the goal of this workshop is to introduce the use of large language models as a method to help summarize the qualitative information that you all collect as clerkship directors from your clerkship narratives. And we want to give you some confidence and agency in trying to be able to use this as you go back home. So specifically, we're going to identify how to design prompts for large language models to summarize the qualitative comments from a clerkship for the medical student progress evaluation. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the limitations of AI large language models, including privacy. So as a bit of background, all of us are aware of the LCME accreditation standards, and element 9.5 is explicit about the use of narrative assessment when such interactions allow for it between teachers and students. And this is throughout the curriculum. But I think we all realize that creating and summarizing high quality narrative is a challenge in the clerkship year. And in the forthcoming book from the Alliance for Clinical Education, Dr. Jamie Geringer and I have a chapter discussing descriptive evaluations in more detail and provide some suggestions. Now, if we want to think about the quality of narrative, we just want to introduce a few background articles for you that might be helpful with your own program. So certainly concerns about narrative quality and idiosyncrasy are well documented in the literature. And there was one study of narrative quality that looked at what are the things that sort of predicted it. And not surprisingly, evaluations that were completed within 10 days of the end of a rotation had higher quality ratings. And evaluations written by women faculty were generally better than those written by men. Interestingly, the length of experience of teaching or the time spent with the student didn't seem to be predictive of the quality of the narrative. And now in a more extensive scoping review of the markers of narrative quality that was published in 2022, they identified 3 factors that influence the quality of narratives that are gathered. So one is the learner-assessor relationship, and in particular, what the local feedback culture is. Another is the time that's required for the direct observation and for actually completing the task of providing the descriptive comments, and inherently the abilities of the assessors and how you can help them. And in the scoping review, what are the indicators of quality of narratives? So again, I don't think any of these will be a surprise to people. So describe the performance with an emphasis on specific elements and examples, an effort to balance constructive and reinforcing comments, providing recommendations about how to improve. So what's the next step for the student? They should be comparing the observed performance to an expected standard. They should provide some justification for the ratings that typically are on a form. Try to use language that's clear and understandable, and write the narrative in a manner that's using a non-judgmental style. So a lot on this slide, but this is work that's come out of the AAMC and some of their affinity groups on the medical student progress evaluation and the points they believe that the MSPE should be addressing. And I've highlighted 2 things that I think are particularly important for clerkship directors to understand. One was a call for including details about professionalism, including both deficient and exemplary performance. And the other for us to all bear in mind is really that the MSPE should be limited to 7 single-space pages and 12-point font, and that's total. That's to encompass all of the student's medical school experience to date. So in this slide, it's talking about MSPEs in the clerkships, and the reference is below. And it's very clear that the belief is that the clerkship narrative should be edited at the clerkship level, not at the MSPE writer level. On the one hand, that makes sense. The clerkship director is responsible for the overall narrative. But we think what this means is the summary from the individual clerkship that ends up in the MSPE should be written by the clerkship director and not by the persons writing the MSPE. With that in mind, an individual clerkship director has to keep in mind that their summary probably cannot be any longer than 500 words, given the overall limitation on the MSPE of being 7 pages, single-spaced, and 12-point font. So some questions that this raises is, should the format of the MSPE clerkship narrative summary be the same across all of your clerkships at your institution? And we're going to come back to that in a bit. But I think a more pressing question is, how in the world can you summarize a complete narrative in so few words? And this is where we think generative AI or large language models can play a role. So there are lots of examples of generative AI. Probably the most common that people have heard about or are probably using include open products, OpenAI like ChatGPT. Google's product is known as Gemini, and there are others. It's important to bear in mind, though, that the output that you get from the AI model is really still a function of what we, as the user, put into it. There's an article talking about all the things that AI could do to help accelerate change. And the one thing I've highlighted is, how can AI help with summarizing complex articles or complex data? And that can be the clerkship narrative. How do you take a large clerkship narrative and reduce it to something that's meaningful in only 400 to 500 words? So AI is pretty good at summarizing complex information from survey data. It's adaptive learning, can summarize literature. And the advantage is, when we think about it from the clerkship narrative standpoint and the MSPE, is this could clearly be a time saver. AI never gets tired, doesn't get tired of reading the narratives, doesn't get tired of summarizing the narratives. And you can continually refine what you ask the AI to do. You can refine the prompt that you're using. There are disadvantages, and we all know about what had been called hallucinations, but are probably confabulations, where AI is actually making up the response. Again, it's generative AI, it's using an algorithm, it's trying to predict what the next word is going to be. So sometimes it creates things that don't actually exist. Clearly concerns about privacy, especially if you're using a large language model that's open and all the data that's being put into it is used to train the model. And again, you need to train the model. It needs examples to work from to get the results that you need. Most people are probably now familiar with the prompt, but prompt engineering is basically, how are you asking the artificial intelligence, the large language model, to help you? It's really about how you ask good questions and try to provide clear instructions. And this is very clearly an iterative process, as we'll try to illustrate in a bit. It's a constant effort at designing and refining the inputs to get your desired outputs. The more that you can give it, the better outputs that you're going to get. But it's also important to realize that you're not going to get the same results, certainly across platforms that you use, but sometimes even within the same platform, providing the prompt and giving it the information, you might get a different result. So there are different components of a prompt: identifying what the goal is, providing the context for it, setting the parameters if you can, and then continuing to refine it. There are different components of it, but clearly one of them, and the most important one, is what task are you asking the AI model to help you with? So as an example, one might be thinking about planning a vacation, and you can think about what the role, the task, the context, the example, the format, and the tone. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kelly, who is going to tell you more about our experience at USIS and how we've implemented large language models. Bill, take it away.
Well, thanks, Dr. Hemmer. The medicine clerkship at USU is a 10-week experience, and we send our 182 or so medical students out to 10 different hospitals in about 6 different time zones, all throughout CONUS, which is a military term for the continental United States, and as far away as Hawaii. And you know that if you have 2 or more sites, that comparability is just a huge issue. And one of the ways we strive to achieve comparability, and an important way, is to make sure we have a robust and consistent evaluation system. And I think that AI can help you summarize some of those evaluations that you get, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But in terms of where our narrative comments come from, we use the synthetic, criterion-based framework, reporter, interpreter, manager, educator. And we have actual conversations with our faculty. About every 2.5 weeks, we talk to them and then generate these rich comments. All of that conversation can lead to a lot of text. And let me share with you one of our narratives, which I think is a thing of beauty. We're looking at 6 pages of pretty rich narrative comments. I replaced the student's name for privacy, but it tells you which hospital they rotated at, what were the dates, okay, and then each of the comments from everyone that they worked with, both in the clinic and the inpatient setting, their teaching preceptor. And then at the very bottom, it talks about our 2 final exams. And as you can imagine, that looks different from maybe some of our colleagues on surgery or obstetrics or psychiatry. But we did get together all the clerkship directors, not just to meet the AAMC recommendations for the summaries that go into the MSPE, but really try to be fair to the students, fair to the program directors with that written product, making it both concise and easy to look for themes across all of our courses. Some of it is shown here. We agreed on these content areas, and they were all going to be described in this order. So again, easy to see. Some things we didn't agree on, like with the NBME. Medicine doesn't put the score in the narrative summary, but some other clerkships wanted to do that, and we had that leeway. But we all agreed things like that administrative task section was important, and it enabled us to comment on some perhaps minor professionalism issues that were otherwise being omitted. We also agreed that we wanted to be clear and concise and transparent, and we wanted to get away from any kind of unhelpful superlatives or normative comparisons or things like that. And then finally, if we had someone working with us that was remediating, the new narrative summary should reflect if the concerns before had been addressed. What we're talking about today can be done on any platform. The reason I wanted to mention this is at our university, it's a closed system, and you might have such an arrangement at your university. If not, it's okay. You can still do this, but it is important to de-identify content before you put it out there, in theory, for anyone to have access to. Now, Paul helps me close out grades and come up with the summaries of these narratives. And Paul, I think we have about 33 due in the next week or two. Traditionally, these take 30, 45 minutes per student, but AI over the past year, in our experience, has helped a little bit with that. We started with some individually created prompts for the AI, and as you can imagine, the output varied too much. Our next step was to lean on some local university expertise, Harry Burke and others, and that second prompt got better. It had the framework of the output we were looking for. It even included a human-generated summary example to help the AI learn, and the output looked great. But all of the quotes were confabulated. The quotes of performance the AI chose as examples did not exist in the raw data. And you know that if, should you not catch that, your student certainly will catch a quote that is wrong, and that was not acceptable. So our third version was a little more refined, and I'm going to share this with you now and how we use it. So this here is Gemini Advanced 2.0, and I'm going to show you our prompt that we came up with and then demonstrate in real time how we use it to create a MSPE summary. But first, I just wanted to encourage you to play around with this content if you haven't already. For example, you can ask it a question, and for some reason it's not Control-V to paste a question. You have to do Shift-Control-V. But how well do you think AI does at making these summaries of narrative evaluations for the MSPE? And within seconds, you have some information on potential benefits, some of the considerations, but also some humility, which I thought was nice, talking about limitations and challenges, the issue of bias, and ends with some recommendations and really noting that this technology holds great promise, but you still need those safeguards and human oversight, which I think is nice. More granularly, I'd encourage you to try working with your AI when you're trying to plan your workshop for AIM, or just want to check on yourself and your thought process. You give it a role, medicine clerkship director, a context. Hey, you're presenting at a national conference to other colleagues. What should I cover in a workshop on AI and large language models for this task of summarizing narrative evaluations for the MSPE? And it does a nice job. It starts with kind of the problem that's in need of a solution, and then talks about some technical considerations, but also these concerns, ethical concerns, and potential pitfalls, which is great. Even suggests some future research and action items, key takeaway message, which I hope you got today or will get today. And I think Dr. Hemmer covered a lot of this, and we're going to come back to some of the limitations in just a minute. And while I'll show you our prompt, and you want to create a prompt that meets your needs, AI, of course, can even help you with that. So what if you simply ask Gemini, hey, what is a prompt that I can use to use an AI to summarize descriptive evaluations, third-year internal medicine clerkship students? I want 500-word answers, bulleted, fair, and clear. What prompt could I use? And again, with just a few seconds, it gives you a prompt that has a role, an objective, a context. It tells you where to paste in the narrative comments that you have. Then here are the AI instructions to itself, and it on its own identified these themes, which are reasonable: clinical skills, medical knowledge, professionalism, and so on. It tells it to create a bulleted list. Okay, keeps the word limits and adds constraints. How organized it is. It reminds it not to confabulate or make assumptions. And you want to make sure that it's not just positive, negative feedback, and then it instructs itself on the output with a few reminders. And then it is a reminder to us, using this prompt, the important part of submitting data for review, and then human review and iterative improvement. This would be a good starting point, and then you can continue to shape it and make changes to it over time. Okay, now here is our prompt. I just opened up a Word document, and it looks like a lot, but most of this in blue is just providing an example for the AI. So don't let it be too intimidating. The components are pretty straightforward. We tell the AI, here's the comments, and all we do is paste in the comments there. And then we give the AI instructions. Please read through it and summarize. And of note, you do want to say please. I think you get better comments when you are polite to the AI, and a lot of other people have noted that as well. We want 500 words. We want the following template sections, and then we give it a few reminders to make it look like a professional summary. We want to avoid things like normative evaluations or comments, and then some things we put in our narrative in brackets should not end up in the summary. That's for our internal use only. And we don't want it to make up content, just use the stuff that's in the summary. We give it the template sections: professionalism, administrative tasks, clinical strengths. Examples, we want 3 specific quotations, okay? And then areas of future clinical growth, and then a summary that is rhyme based. And then all of this stuff here is basically an example of what we want to see at the end. We say, look at this good example of a clerkship evaluation summary. There's a title with the student's name. It comments on professionalism, completion of administrative tasks, areas of clinical strengths. Here are the quotations, and we like the quotations to be listed next to, parenthetically, who on the team made those comments, areas of future growth, and then the summary. And then we tell it for the output, this is what we want: declarative narrative summary for the student. Let me show you how we do it in real time. So what we do is we select the narrative comments, copy those right here in the prompt where it says place narrative here. We place the narrative. And then what we do is take this whole thing, prompt with the embedded narrative, copy that, paste that into the AI Gemini and hit return. And in real time, it's working on the summary. And then I go in, having read the 6 or 7 pages of comments, I can tell whether this is accurate or not, and it captures the right tone. And then I go through looking for things like redundancy. Here it talks about preparedness for patient encounters. That's also listed as a clinical strength. I would take out the duplication. Under clinical strength examples, we ask for 3 quotes. I like the ones AI picked, a nice range of settings and faculty levels, but I would go back, confirm these for accuracy, and I sometimes will change 1 or more of these out. Under future growth, in this case, they talk about confidence in plans. I don't like the word confidence. It's kind of a high inference loaded thing, so I'll change this to assertiveness in communication. And then looking at the summary itself, not bad, but I remove the NBME score like we talked about. I'll also look for, sometimes they close with talking about future promise and end on like with a positive spin. I'll get rid of that. Really want to focus on past performance. And then this rhyme rating might not be accurate. We base the overall rhyme grade on several factors. We weight rhyme grade recommendations from different faculty based on their role and time with student and so on. Now AI could do that, and we're in the process of teaching it to do so. But right now I still do this manually until I update our prompt. So what can I say in terms of lessons learned, again, about a year in? This is probably shaving off 20, maybe even 30 minutes per student. It depends how on the individual. It is, it cuts down on cognitive load, especially when you have a bunch of these to do before a deadline, that 6-week LCME deadline. And it gives us the same starting point. Now, AI has bias in it, just like individuals has bias in it. Paul and I have, I think, a very good inter-rater reliability, but using the AI up front kind of levels the playing field and gets us off at the same level, and then we can reconcile any differences by consensus between him and myself. You still have to look at that output for sure. I'm still always checking those quotes to make sure those are real because of my earlier experience, and they've been consistently authentic with this latest prompt that we've been using. Sometimes, though, I'll pull out a different quote that I think is more representative. Or maybe I note that the AI is just choosing quotes from inpatient versus outpatient, or getting intern comments but not staff comments. So sometimes I'll change out the quotes. And in the interest of transparency and ethical AI use, I also came up with this kind of disclaimer that I put in the narrative before the summary, but this does not get into the MSPE summary directly. But I want the students to see it, that I used a large language model as an initial pass, but then me or our vice chair took responsibility for it and completed it. And I think that's important. We want students to use AI responsibly and cite their use, and I think we should as well. Now, there are ethical considerations when using AI for MSPE summaries or for anything that you do, and each of these is important, such as that last bullet. There's a big environmental impact of using all of this electricity to power these computers. But I want to focus on 3 of these as we close: accuracy and bias, privacy and transparency, and then the issue of governance. How do you ensure accuracy and fight against bias? Well, just like you do in real life, I think it applies to AI. A continuous iterative improvement cycle, kind of PDSA cycle, plan, do, study, act. And this is something that we do a human check on all of this output, and we're continuing to train our AI and our prompts to be better at this. In terms of privacy, this is, I think, more of an issue for your hospital-based applications. You know, there's encryption and there's approval processes for software at your medical institutions, and HIPAA and other privacy laws. I think that for this application, as long as if you have a closed system, you can upload and download, but you have to make sure it's a closed system like we have. If it isn't, then that de-identification is so important. And then you can download it and then add back the student identification before you finalize. And then governance. It's important to look at your university rules for this. You might even be asked to help construct some of those. Federal regulations are evolving, and they apply to a lot of us at different institutions. Just a couple of bullet points I'll share from some of the evolving USU policies. Really core principles about making sure we approach this with human dignity, academic integrity, maintaining the high standards of our profession. And then it's really important to emphasize that all of these tools help you, but do not replace you. And just like I did in our MSPE summary, having a citation or explaining how you used AI is appropriate. And I want to share this. I found this online about several months ago, and I reflect on this a lot. This was described as the AI wheel of death, where, you know, if you're not careful, you can create a curriculum with AI, create an assessment with AI. Unfortunately, the students take your test with AI. You generate scoring with AI, and then the student uses AI to appeal your grade, and the cycle continues. You know, it's discouraging, but I think this is what we want to continue to keep in mind, and never forget that there's a human element in there, and never want to give up both the responsibility and the authority and really the fun of what we do. So in conclusion, again, thank you for joining Paul and I. We have a QR code linked to our prompts, and we'd love for you to reach out anytime and hear about your experience. But the clerkship director, you are responsible. You're responsible for a lot of things. You both have to create that evaluation narrative and now create that summary for the MSPE. One step, like we did, is talk to your other clerkship directors and other specialties to get on that same page, so there can be a consistent product for the program directors, regardless of what specialty your student is applying to. And then generative AI, you know, we found it saves time, cuts down on cognitive load a little bit, gives you a similar starting point if you're sharing this task with other people. It takes personal training. It also takes time to train the AI to do what you want it to do. And you have to keep paying attention to that output. And I'll refer you to that top bullet because we are still responsible. Thank you again for joining us.